Welcome to Mind Love Premium, episode 97. Today's episode is all about how to commit to activism without being consumed by anger, self-pity, or hate.
The impact of this is to say, like, all those small blessings of our lives that we take for granted or overlook every day, they become more noticeable because we start looking for them. And to me, that is an incredibly profound practice in recognizing the light in our world. I mean, it's so easy to focus on the dark. There's so much negativity around us, and our brains are wired to find it and to stick with it. And so being intentional about saying, you know what, I'm going to look for the light. And what I've found is it really opens up your eyes to how much more good there is in the world than there is bad. And it instills a sense of hope.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. Standing up for what you believe in is, in my opinion, one of the most honorable things that you can do. I feel proud, even when I'm up against resistance, or even when my life is more difficult, because I know that I'm living in alignment with my values and beliefs. I read a meme the other day, because, hey, isn't that where we get all of our inspiration these days? That said something like, stand up now so your kids don't inherit a world where they can't. That hit hard. The problem is, fighting for a cause and spending so much time and thought immersed in your own ideology, and then surrounding yourself with all the people who think the same, is both amazing and also the exact directions to create your own echo chamber. I've found that the more I fight, the easier it is to become angry at the world around me. Why can't everyone else see what I see? How are they more afraid of this than that? Why do so many people believe this nonsense? Are they really that scared, or is everyone just dumb? Is that what they really think that I believe? The frustrating part is that there are so many misconceptions as to what people are even fighting for. We all think that we see the other side clearly, but I can't say for certain that any of us do. We saw a lot of this the last 2 years. I spent a lot of time on both sides of almost everything, just trying to see what people really believed, what was driving their behaviors, and what truth lied behind any of it. It was eye-opening. I spent most of my life living on one side of a political argument in a city where everyone thought the same as I did. Maybe that's even why I thought that way. What I found when I started exploring was that most of the talking points about what the other side wanted or what the other side believed weren't actually accurate at all. Each side warps what the other's motives are to make them sound like monsters, which is genius when you're driving a political campaign, but pretty terrible if you care about unifying people. And I don't want to get into specifics because usually when I do, all of our emotional programming kicks in and we start to see each other's differences more than our similarities. And that's not the goal here. But I will say that whenever I feel myself really disliking a whole group of people who think differently than I do, I try to relocate their humanity. Usually that looks like getting curious and asking questions and dropping my own agenda or the need to persuade while I do it. But I'll be honest, even so, the emotion still kicks in. The part of me that wants to word vomit all of my facts and figures starts screaming inside my head while the outer version of me is just smiling and nodding. If I don't crack, that is. And the more time that I spend building my case, researching, reading personal stories, hearing people who agree with me, the more black and white an issue becomes to me. And that's just setting the world up for more division. So what do we do? How do we participate in activism without being consumed by anger or hatred or even self-pity and hopelessness? Well, that's what we're talking about today. And our guest is Dr. Simran Singh. He's the executive director of the Aspen Institute's Religion and Society program. He's senior advisor for equity and inclusion at YSC Consulting and a visiting professor at Union Seminary. He's also the author of The Light We Give, The Power of Sick Wisdom to Transform Your Life. So 3 key things we will learn are the intersection between hate and fear, how to get comfortable embracing your discomfort, and a daily practice to keep your optimism while taking action. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Simran Singh to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Excited to be with you.
So what's your story? What inspired you toward activism and then eventually kind of a more mindful approach to activism?
I guess we're jumping right into it. So I guess I'll go there with you. My experience in this country, I grew up in Texas to a Punjabi Sikh immigrant family. So we were the only kids in all of South Texas who wore turbans. And we experienced from a really young age what it felt like to be excluded, to be treated differently. And, at the time we didn't really have the language, but inequity. I mean, we experienced it every day, whether it was on the playground being left out or in sports matches where, refs and rule books said we couldn't play, or, when we go to airports and we have to go through secondary screening and racial profiling and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that experience, the deep experience of knowing what it feels like, the pain you feel when you see those experiences in other people, knowing that other people go through similar challenges. I mean, I think that's what really woke me up to activism. There was a long period in my life where I thought what I experienced was so different from everyone I knew. And in many ways it is. I always just thought of myself as isolated, that no one would understand what I went through. But as I started to get to know people better and learn more about the challenges they faced, I recognized it as a shared challenge in many ways. And that's really what drove me into activism and really focusing in on securing justice for everyone.
I'm going to ask this question because I feel like the world has become so divided that people are just like strengthening their own talking points, that it's hard to see the other side sometimes. And one of the things that I hear come up from the people that are resistant towards even seeing that there's a problem here is that people say like, well, so many kids are bullied. And so I'm curious, how do you see the difference between like actual racist bullying or being bullied because of your culture, where you come from, versus like I was bullied for years, like just by the cool kid who didn't want to think I was cool. I felt isolated. Like, what is the difference for those who don't understand?
It's such a good question because I think in an ideal world, kids wouldn't face bullying. And so much of how we operate as a society and as individuals is to just create hypothetical aspirations out of context and just say, this is what we want. And there's something really beautiful about that. I mean, I love when we talk about our cultural values or our aspirations and really set our sights on those. I think that's really important. But I think there's also something really dangerous about not being pragmatic or practical about it. And to turn it back to your question, I was also one of these people who said, we need to eradicate bullying. Like, we just need to get rid of it. And then I had kids and I'm like observing and paying attention more to how kids operate. And I'm recognizing what we all already know in our hearts, which is kids can be rough with one another. And bullying is not just because you look different. It might be the way you speak. It might be a disability you have. It might be, who your favorite basketball team is. I mean, kids find all sorts of reasons to pick on one another. And I don't think it's practical for us to say, as I said, and as I thought, we can get rid of bullying altogether. So then the question becomes, what's the goal? Like, what are we trying to accomplish with our kids here? And part of it, to me, is to help them see the kinds of people that they are and the kinds of people they can be. And part of the lessons that I'm trying to teach my girls, of course, they will have biases, and of course, they'll have stereotypes of people. And of course, they'll meet all sorts of challenges themselves around the way because of their identities or where they come from or how they look or what their parents look like and all that kind of stuff that we all know. But to me, the difference here with regard to the type of bullying And the way that I'm trying to think about it with my own kids is, what are the core values that we're trying to teach here? How do we get them to see the inherent dignity in every person, and recognizing what messages they're going to be getting from society that are oppressive and hurtful, right? Racism, misogyny, homophobia. And once we can see that all of this is going to be in the air that they breathe anyway, then recognizing that it's my responsibility as their parent to help counteract that. And so in some ways, it's almost a very strategic decision, if we want to think about it this way, with our kids and even for ourselves. Right. There are all sorts of biases that we carry constantly. And perhaps one way to approach becoming more mindful and just is to say, let's identify the areas where they are going to be most likely to have bias or bigoted ideas. And let's deal with those proactively first. And that, to me at least, has become my approach to parenting with my own kids.
So a big part of it is not just like, how are they feeling because they're being excluded and they're being told that they don't fit in or whatever, but it's more like, what are they learning about reality right now? Like, what messages are being drilled into them because they're probably going to carry this along with them if they hear it often enough as well, right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And our inclination as parents and as teachers and as adults in general is to protect our kids from any kind of hurt. And I have that impulse too, right? Actually, I'll tell you, yesterday, my older daughter we were playing at the beach with a friend, and her friend pushed her off. They were jumping off the lifeguard chair onto a big pile of sand, and a bunch of kids were there and doing it. It's kind of a game that they play. And the other girl pushed my daughter, and my daughter landed face first in the sand, and she cried a little bit. And I mean, it was, as a parent, I was horrified, and my impulse was to scold this girl and to sort of like take my daughter away and the play date there. I mean, that's in my heart. That's what I really wanted to do. And what I was grappling with in that moment was, that is a protective response. I want to protect my daughter and make sure she never feels hurt or pain in the way that all of us feel for our kids. But recognizing that actually this can be a learning moment for her, in which she can protect herself from future pain and learn how to deal with these kinds of challenges and difficulties as they arise. And so I think part of what I'm thinking about is, how do we encode and instill resilience in our kids so that when they meet difficult moments, they're ready to stand up for themselves and stand by their values. And I think that's so much of my experience growing up in this country with a turban and brown skin, and having to figure out how I wanted to interact with people when they didn't necessarily like me or want me around. And so I do think there's something really important here about giving our kids and giving ourselves the opportunity to lean into those uncomfortable moments and figure out what is an appropriate, authentic response that helps us feel proud when we're walking away of who we are. And so, yeah, it's a really difficult thing to actually do in practice, which is why I think we don't tend to do it in our culture and in our society. But I think we're worse off for it, and we would be much better off if we started to bring that into our daily practice.
Right. And we're talking about kids right now, but it's funny. I think the main role of kids is, it's like this little reflection for me, where so many of the things that I've kind of put off, or I'm like, I'll work on that later. I'm not ready to give up that bad habit. I'm not ready to give up that reaction because something about stewing in it feels good, or I think it does, or whatever. But then you have a kid there and it's like, oh, it's not about me anymore. This child's going to carry it on. But even without kids, the way you look at that, like, okay, how can I, if somebody were watching me, what would they take from this? And I think that happens so often, where somebody can be the victim of something, but then their reaction ends up making them also a perpetrator. Like, they end up punching the guy or whatever it is, and then people that around them watching, then they're like, oh, well, that's why there's that stereotype. Look at this person doing this. And it's like, so what are you thinking before you had kids, when you were dealing with some of this racism or any other of the challenges that we tend to be confronted with that causes these reactions, what do you say to yourself in those ways so that you're still aligning with your values rather than just being reactionary? What do you say to yourself in those ways so that you're still aligning with your values rather than just being reactionary?
Black Friday is coming, and for the adults in your life who love the coolest toys, well, there's something for them this year too. Bartesian is the premier craft cocktail maker that automatically makes more than 60 seasonal and classic cocktails, each in under 30 seconds at the push of a button. And right now, Bartesian is having a huge site-wide sale. You can get $100 off any cocktail maker or cocktail maker bundle when you spend $400 or more. So, if the cocktail lover in your life has been good this year, or the right kind of bad, get them Bartesian. At the push of a button, make bar-quality cosmopolitans, martinis, Manhattans, and more. All in just 30 seconds. All for $100 off. Amazing toys aren't just for kids. Get $100 off a cocktail maker when you spend $400 through Cyber Monday. Visit bartesian.com/cocktail. That's BARTESIAN.com/cocktail.
What do you say to yourself in those ways so that you're still aligning with your values rather than just being reactionary?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, it's been, for me at least, years of practice, decades of practice. And I still wouldn't say that I'm perfect at it. I mean, far from it. There are often moments where people say things to me or do things to me, and I don't walk away feeling proud of how I responded necessarily. So it's that's to say, this is a constant practice, and it really is practice. But I'll tell you, the experience I had when I was younger really informs my approach, because when I was younger, I remember actually the first time someone called me a terrorist. It was a soccer referee who wanted to search my turban because he said I probably had bombs in there, and I was a kid and I didn't know what to do, and I really wanted to play with my team, and so I just let him search my turban, and I hated myself. I mean, I'd never let anyone touch my turban before. It's not something I do now. I just was really disappointed with my passivity in that moment. And I thought about it for weeks. I mean, several weeks. I think part of what I was experiencing in that moment was recognizing that giving in to people's racism is not going to make me feel good. And then about a year later, a basketball teammate of mine, we were playing in the locker room after practice one day, and he pulled off my turban, and he made some racist joke, and I knew he was kidding. But he pulled off my turban and I got upset again. And I started thinking about my promise to myself that I wouldn't be passive anymore. And I just started punching him, and it turned into like a real fight. And it was serious. And our teammates eventually separated us. But I remember walking away from that and again, not feeling good. And it was such a strange experience because here I was like a 12-year-old at this point, and I've basically taken the two options that I had available to me, right? It was fight or flight. And I did both, and neither of them left me feeling good. And I knew in my heart that there had to be another way of dealing with these situations. One that I didn't walk away feeling upset or disappointed or more frustrated, but one where I felt proud of how I walked away. And so part of the experience for me was trying to figure out what this third path looked like. And I think this is something that we're all struggling with right now. How do you sincerely engage with the difficulties of our world when they feel so immense and overwhelming and intense? I mean, it's really tough. And I think we have to go beyond our instincts to either fight or to give in and really figure out how to sincerely engage in ways that make us feel like we're giving what we can of ourselves to ensure that our values are aligned with our behaviors. I think that's something that's really been important to me for walking away with satisfaction rather than frustration. And also to ensure that we remain committed and steadfast to reducing the suffering of people around us, right? So to me, and this is part of Sikh philosophy, it's about developing ourselves internally, strengthening our ethical fortitude, our mental fortitude, so that we can meet each moment with the best of who we are. And also, it's about remaining clear about our own commitment to one another, so that when it feels easy to walk away, we don't, because we feel bound to one another and committed to reducing each other's suffering. So I think that's sort of a overview, I guess, of how I've come to this point. It's really drawing from different spiritual traditions, particularly my own Sikh philosophical tradition. But it really has changed my experience of dealing with all the ugliness in our world, and there's a lot of it, and it's really easy to get caught up in it and to be down and feel dark all the time. But I think there's this approach that I've been grateful enough to receive has given me an approach that really works well, at least for me.
Yeah, because you're right. One of the things you said in your book is that we tend to either ignore or agitate the problem. So we just give in and just let this person be a bully, or let the government do this, or, I was going to name specific examples, but I know it's going to divide, so I'm going to leave that out. Or we agitate it, we fight, or we aren't aligned with those values. And so what do you recommend doing? How do we really get in line with those values when it comes to an issue that is meaningful and important, and also we're very affected by? What is your process for sitting down and saying okay, well, how do I want to show up for this? And then actually finding the avenue where you can make a difference, rather than just posting memes on social media 3 times a day.
Yeah. It's so true. That's exactly where we end up. And it's part of why we feel, I think, so disillusioned, because that's our default mode. And we know deep down that we're not actually doing anything, right? If we're posting on social media, or we're announcing something to our friends about our political views, but not following through with action, we know that's hypocrisy. We know we're hypocrites. We know that we're part of the problem, but we're not really able to figure out how. And I think part of it is because it's so counter to what we have in our culture, right? Culturally, I was just talking about this to a friend today. Culturally, we don't really learn values. I mean, where would we? I mean, we don't learn them in school. I didn't. I grew up in Texas at public school. It wasn't something we really talked about. So if you asked me as a 13, 14-year-old what I stood for, or what was most important to me in terms of who I was or my principles, I wouldn't have had a clear answer for you. I mean, I probably would have been able to come up with something, but it wouldn't have been something I felt deep down, because I hadn't really pondered on it before. And so I think part of the process that we all need to really figure out how to bring into our lives is spending some time internally or with our families in the ways that companies do, and really thinking about, well, what are we here for? What are we trying to do? What's my mission in life? What's my vision? What are my values? And these can change from time to time as we evolve, just like companies evolve, right? Things change, life changes. That's great. But the values that really drive us, they're at the core of our being. And we need to spend some time introspecting. And part of the benefit of doing this is not just articulating what's most important to us, but also having that clarity in mind. And, part of what I describe in the book, and, this is true for my lived experience, the clarity of the practice of articulating values. What that means is, in difficult moments, you really can reflect on, hey, what's my compass? Literally, we talk about a moral compass. How do I make this tough decision? And there are all sorts of moments in life where, and especially with racism and hate that I've experienced, there is no perfect answer, and you have to figure out how to do the best you can. And so I think step one, articulating and identifying one's core values after a reflective process is really powerful. And then the next step that I would recommend, and I think we don't do this either culturally, is to give ourselves daily practices, right? So whatever someone defines as their values, if honesty is one of your values, then what is one thing you are going to do every day to practice honesty? If gratitude is one of your values, what is one thing you'll do every day to practice gratitude? Because I think, I mentioned this in the book too, we live in such a way that we expect ourselves to be perfect when difficulties arise, but we've never really been exercising those muscles. And I have found that people who have been exercising those muscles, and this is especially true in the hate crime work that I've done and worked with victims, I found this over and over again. When you're working with communities who have practiced daily how to live with love, then it's very natural for them to respond to hate with love. And for the rest of us who haven't been practicing that, of course we wouldn't be ready or find it in our hearts to meet hate with love because we haven't been building it. And so to me, that's really the next critical step after identifying the values. It's daily practice. All of this is really simple. I don't think I'm breaking any news when I'm telling people like all you really need to do is figure out where you want to go and then start getting there. But there is something I think really important about connecting the dots when it comes to values in a society where we're not really talking about these kinds of things, at least not often enough.
Yeah, I find that I've never learned about values until I started a journey of self-help. And then I'm like, oh, so we can just like decide how we want to be and then come up with little ways to create that daily practice so that we can constantly be reinforcing this. Because what people don't realize is that if you are not intentional about who you want to be, then society, the people around you, are going to create you instead. Like, we are always creating ourselves. Only so many people are doing it unconsciously because they haven't added any intention to it. And so I've done this practice so many times, and it's not even like a one-time thing that I need to do, because you find yourself losing it after a while. And then you're like, God, I just feel like my life is chaotic. I don't feel the way I want to feel. I'm not doing the things I want to do. Why is that? And it's like, well, regroup. Figure out where you've slipped. Like, are you doing those daily practices? Are you practicing your mental habits? Or are you just, again, going back to the kind of autopilot that we tend to default to? So I'm curious, what are some of the daily practices that you instilled so that you could align more with the values that you wanted to? What are some of the daily practices that you instilled so that you could align more with the values that you wanted to?
Yeah, I'll just first agree with everything you said. And like you, so many years of my life passed where I didn't realize that we really could shape who we become. And of course, it sounds silly in retrospect because of course we can. It never really occurred to me that we could be as intentional about creating our lives as we're about everything else we're intentional about. So I really appreciate that point. In terms of daily practices, I have a few that I'll share that I have found really powerful for me. And what I would also say is, I'm not the type of person, and I don't think Sikh philosophy is the type of philosophy that insists that there's only one way to self-improvement or to happiness. And, everyone has to find their own journey in getting there. And so I'll share two that have been really powerful for me. And when I'm at my best, I think I'm really in tune with these practices. And they're both extremely simple. One is a gratitude list, and each evening noting down, literally on pen and paper, noting down three things that I'm grateful for. And, part of my experience with this is as you become more committed to this practice, what you might find, as I did, is that throughout your day, you begin noticing things that you tell yourself, I'm just going to note that in my head so that I make sure to write that down tonight. And the impact of this is to say, like, all those small blessings of our lives that we take for granted or overlook every day, they become more noticeable because we start looking for them. And to me, that is an incredibly profound practice in recognizing the light in our world. I mean, it's so easy to focus on the dark. There's so much negativity around us, and our brains are wired to find it and to stick with it. And so being intentional about saying, I'm going to look for the light. And what I've found, and I think you will too, is it really opens up your eyes to how much more good there is in the world than there is bad. It instills a sense of hope and beauty in a way that, I found hard to find in other ways. My second practice that's really been transformative for me Also really simple, and that's take 10 seconds every day to notice the humanity in somebody that you're interacting with. And it doesn't have to be stated out loud. It doesn't have to be corny where you say something deep to them. Like it could just literally be seeing someone walking down the street and thinking about them and their family and where they're coming from and what their lives might be like. I think that, to me, it does a few different things. One is it helps you see the world in a much bigger way, right? Rather than having the narrow, egocentric view that's just limited to our own lives, helping to get some perspective and recognize the world isn't just about you. And there's some humility and some graciousness in that. And I think the other thing that really it's helped me do is to develop empathy for people that I don't know and may never interact with, and to really feel connected with them in a way that I think all of us want to feel, but it's so hard to feel that way because otherwise we're always taught to look for difference, right, on the basis of race or gender or sexual orientation or religion or whatever it is. But I think this practice, for me at least, has helped me to start to see people in a relational way rather than in an oppositional way. And that's been really powerful.
That's so difficult when somebody's actually like personally yelling at you or offending you, or I hesitate to use the word offending because I just feel like being offended is a personal problem. And I mean, like you have some control there. But that's not to say that people don't say heinous, awful, horrible things to another person, or like legitimately move to oppress them in different ways or to actually hurt them, whether emotionally or physically. But one of the things that I try to remind myself is that often that hate that seems so clear is actually stemming from some version of fear, but it doesn't always work. Like I know that logically or maybe spiritually it's something I've learned. But when it comes down to it, it's so much more difficult to actually find that humanity in the other person who's suddenly become like some monster toward you. How do you handle that?
It's a very real question. And I think, in some cases it's easier, in some cases it's harder, right? I think one of the things that many people who come from the margins of society have to learn pretty quickly is that other people's bigotry is their problem. Right. It's a problem in their hearts. It's not a problem with us that we've done anything wrong or that we have something wrong in our hearts. And that's really helped me. Now, of course, your point is that's true. But even then, their bigotry can have real consequences on us. Right. Like we may not want to take it personally, but in some ways it is about our person and our safety and security. And I think that's very true. And so for me, I'll say a couple of things. One is none of this is to say that, we shouldn't hold people accountable for their mistreatment and harm of others, right? Like, of course we should. These things are not mutually exclusive. But I think, what we're talking about here is how do we receive these moments in ways that do not suck us into other people's negativity, right? That's part of my challenge here. And so one piece is to say, well, recognize that it's not about you. This is something I literally remind myself in these moments, right? Their anger it's not about me. It's about them and whatever problems they have. And that's really helpful. And another aspect of, what grounds me in these moments is to ask myself, like, did I do anything wrong to this person? Is what they're saying legitimate? And, of course we're all biased, but part of the experience in these moments. And one of the questions I'll also ask is if I replaced my personal self with someone else who looks like me, would this person have the same reaction to them? And if the answer is yes, then probably it's not really about me, right? It's probably about someone's racism or hate or whatever it is. And I'll say, just to sort of wrap this one up, I mean, I'll tell you, and this is a story that I tell in the book. It actually, spans a few a few chapters, several chapters in the book. This has worked for me in most contexts. The most difficult experience I had in learning to see someone's humanity was a white supremacist who did exactly what you just described, right? He came into a sick place of worship, massacred the congregation, then killed himself. So he never apologized, never had any remorse for what he did, or at least not explicitly. And I had to come to terms, after a few weeks at least, I had to come to terms with the fact that I was angry with him and he was gone, and my anger wasn't hurting him. It was only hurting me. And so I think that also, the recognition that what is inside of us doesn't necessarily produce, it's not necessarily going to produce anything positive for us unless we learn how to channel it for the good. That to me has been a really difficult lesson to learn, and one I'm always working on.
Yeah, I have to explicitly remind myself that this anger that I'm holding on to, the passive aggression I'm holding on to, the envy, whatever, I'm the only one holding that. I'm carrying that energy. And not only that, but I'm spreading it with every other interaction that I have before I actually take care of and manage it. But you said something in your book that I love you to elaborate on. You said that you don't believe in evil as a reality of our world. Can you go deeper into that?
Yeah, this is one of the teachings in Sikh philosophy that I find myself really attracted to. And part of the reason it feels so compelling is we live in a world where everything is divided, and our way of conceptualizing the world so often, whether philosophically or theologically or otherwise, there's good and evil is one form of this, but we can say heaven and hell, or pure and polluted, or sacred and profane, right? Constantly we have these dichotomies of how we see the world, and it produces in many ways a polarized possibility, right? You're either on one side or the other, and right now, as we are polarized in this moment, we can see the extreme consequences of that, right? Like everyone on one side is saying the other side is evil, and the reverse is happening on the other side. And what Sikh philosophy offers us, and other spiritual traditions have elements of this too, is a different way of viewing the world in which everything is interconnected, right? In Buddhism, we would call it interdependence. In Sufi mysticism, we would call it wahadat al-wujud. There are different terms and different traditions, and part of what I have really appreciated is the opportunity to think a little bit differently in a way that does not, in my view at least, create artificial binaries and even endpoints on where we are, who we are, but to really offer an approach where we say, you know what, our starting point is divinity. Like we all come from the same source, and if we're all from the same source, then who are we? Like what sense does it make to try and say that something is good or bad? In Sikh philosophy, the teaching is it's almost like at an atomic level, divinity is infused in every aspect of this world. And so if that's how you come to view the world, of course, you would care for creation in the way that you care for one another, because it becomes an act of worship, right? Serving one another becomes a way to express gratitude for everything you have. So there's some really beautiful practical implications. But I think even at a philosophical level, being able to take a very simple logical position of saying, well, if divinity is the source of this world and everybody is created from it, and it doesn't even have to be a religious or a theological view, right? If there's a single source that created us all, if we're all composed of the same material, then there's something that binds us all together. And that way of looking at ourselves and one another produces a different relational possibility that I have personally found to be both sensible and more sensible than the dividing up, but also one with real implications for how we are then able to interact with one another in more humane ways, rather than simply saying this person is rotten and throw them in jail and who cares how they're treated, or these people are inferior and we are justified to enslave them because of their skin color, where they come from, or whatever. So to me, it just presents a different possibility with much more humane outcomes for all of us.
Yeah, it's kind of lazy to just categorize somebody as evil because it really is just taking the humanity away from them. And it is so difficult in practice, though, because I remember actually, it was in the beginning of 2020, the world was shutting down, and I had just decided, okay, I'm not going to get involved in all of the arguments everyone's going to get involved in. I'm going to focus on helping people feel better and trying to decrease the division that's just increasing everywhere else, it seems. And I sent out an email about how, there's no right or wrong, kind of the dangers, basically what you were saying about viewing things as right or wrong. And people pushed back against that. They had such a difficult time. They're like, what do you mean? How do you say there's no evil in the world when pedophilia exists, for example, or whatever? And it's I don't even really fully know how to answer that. All I know is, what good is it doing me in this moment to view things from that perspective? Whereas it takes away control, because then it's just this big force that's greater than me versus, and I'm not saying it can solve all the world's problems though. So, but where is that balance? Where's the balance of deciding okay, yeah, this isn't a helpful perspective, but then grappling with this concept that's just kind of hard to wrap your head around, knowing what goes on in some areas of the world? But where is that balance? Where's the balance of deciding okay, yeah, this isn't a helpful perspective, but then grappling with this concept that's just kind of hard to wrap your head around, knowing what goes on in some areas of the world?
Yeah. It's a great question. I'm thinking about a conversation that, I shared that story of my daughter being pushed off the lifeguard chair and her having to figure out how to deal with that moment. And one of the conversations we had afterwards was right in line with this. And, sometimes the conversations with our kids are the hardest because we have to distill complex ideas into ways that young ones can understand. And I'll share with you what we talked about, which I think is actually perhaps digestible, at least for a complex philosophical question. And the point that I was making to her, and that she understands very clearly as a 6-year-old, is, your friend is not a bad person, but what she did is bad. And it can be as simple as distinguishing between people and their behaviors, right? And I think part of what this allows for, getting into a moral relativism, I wouldn't do that, right? I do think there are things that we can legitimately describe as just or unjust, fair and unfair. And so I do believe that there are places where we can draw the line, and things that we can stand up for, and things that we can say, we're not willing to tolerate that. And hate is one of those things. But even with hate, I would never say that, or at least I would try not to say it. I've been challenged on this in my own life in learning how to navigate this. But I wouldn't say that someone who is hateful is wrong. I mean, is a bad person. But I would say that their perspectives are wrong. I would say that their socialization is wrong. I would say that what their behaviors are wrong, and that we need to deal with all of those. And if we don't, then more people will be harmed. And so I think to a degree, and I don't think it's overly simplistic, it's being able to separate the innate humanity that exists in all of us, what many spiritual traditions refer to as light. Right? We all have a light that is constantly glowing inside of us. And we need to learn how to see that. And also we can recognize that our behaviors sometimes are not in line with what is acceptable or tolerable or what's good about who we are. And so that's perhaps at least one distinction that might be helpful for people.
I love the way you phrase that. Just, we do all have a capacity for light. And unfortunately, if we're not intentional about it, I feel like that light can just be dimmed over time, whether we're criticized or we are oppressed or we, just get kind of pushed back or pushed down by life sometimes. And so we have to kind of make that choice to see ourselves that way. Or as you put it in your book, we have to enter into the life-changing realm of selfless, unconditional love. And you make the point that we all carry a greater capacity for love than we realize. But I'm curious, how do we open ourselves up to it? And what does it look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think it's a constant, at least for me, it's something that's constantly changing. And part of that has to do with my own life situation and the challenges that I'm facing. And I honestly, like it's especially parenting, where you have these kids and parenting is hard, and you love your kids, and you learn along the way that love can take different forms, right? Like sometimes it can be cuddling, and sometimes it can be discipline. And so for me, there's some nuance here with regard to love and practice, which is trying to figure out how to not just make it a daily practice, which we can all do. And I think we could all ask ourselves that question, right? What is one thing I will do each day to be more loving? Maybe it's a compliment to a colleague. Maybe it's a gift for a neighbor. Maybe it's something, a story that you're trying to read about a different culture so you can be more empathetic, right? Like those are easier. And we can think of those on our own. I think what becomes harder, and what I would challenge people to do, is to start expanding what love looks like in their daily life, so that it's not just the easy, soft, relational pieces, but also, for example, what are you doing to make the world more just today, right? Like that is a practice of love. What are you doing to hold someone in power accountable for the way they mistreat other people? Like that's also love. And so I think those different ways of asking that same question can not just help us grow our love through our daily practice, but also can help us broaden what our experience of love is, so that it becomes part of every facet of our life, not just the soft feel-good moments.
I love that. Again, so much comes back to like these choosing who we want to be, because so often the way we handle other people's hate or our oppression, and I feel weird saying that because I know that I'm just this white girl on the other end of the mic. I don't really know oppression, but I just mean collectively, because I'm sure we've all felt it in certain ways, whether it's a choice that you made and now you're not allowed to do certain things because of that choice or whatever it is, or it's something deeper where it's just like who you were when you were born and how people respond to that person, which is a whole different beast that I have not had to deal with. But so much of what we do is just reactionary. And so and I don't blame anyone. It's survival mode. You're triggered emotionally, you're offended, you're actually being told that you're not worthy or whatever it is. And so it's hard not to respond from an emotional place. But as with so many things, we have to decide who we're going to be, regardless of how anyone else is toward us, regardless of how the world around us is. And we don't need to compromise that goal for ourselves or that vision that we have of that true self. Because if we do compromise, then that becomes our belief. Our belief becomes aligned with what we're being told that we are, rather than who we actually are. So thank you so much for bringing such a loving perspective to a tough topic. And for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and your book, where is the best place to connect with you online?
Oh, thank you. So the book is called The Light We Give, How Sick Wisdom Can Transform Your Life, and it's available everywhere books are sold. I always support local bookstores when I can, so that's where I would urge folks to go. I'm on social media way too much. I'm on Twitter as Simran, Simran, and on other platforms as Sikhprof, Sikhprof. So thank you for having me on. It was a really thoughtful conversation that's, even for me, just putting different pieces of life together and into perspective. And I love your emphasis on being proactive about shaping the people we want to become. I believe we have that opportunity. And you're right that so much of what we do every day is in reaction to what's happening. I mean, we're reacting to emails that come in our inbox, and we're reacting to how people are talking to us at the store, and being a little bit more intentional about who we want to become. I mean, that could, even just a little bit, could go a really long way. So really appreciate that. Thank you.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/x97. Your challenge for this week is to do a little of that gratitude practice that we talked about. I haven't made a gratitude practice a challenge in a while, and it honestly should be something that's a part of all of our daily lives. It is so helpful. I'll be honest, my gratitude practice slips sometimes, but I also know that I can feel it when it does. So usually when I'm feeling off, or I'm feeling down, or I'm not that optimistic about life, it's my trigger to remind myself to restart that gratitude practice. But I want to add a little twist to this gratitude practice. I want you to send love or gratitude towards someone who thinks completely differently than you. And not around the idea that they'll eventually think like you, but just any way that you feel aligned with this. You can either get specific around how you're sending love, what you wish for them. Maybe it's that they release fear. Maybe it's that they're happy and healthy. Or maybe it's just that you're sending love in that direction. Loving kindness meditation has actually been studied. If you remember back in episode 213, I had on a guest named Dr. Judson Brewer, and he wrote a book called The Craving Mind, as well as Unwinding Anxiety. But there's a whole section in The Craving Mind about what actually happens in the brain when you send love out to other people. It not only increases your mindfulness, it decreases anxiety, it increases your optimism about life. And so when you are sending this out to specific people, it actually has a profound effect on you. So this is a practice that I like to do at the end of every meditation. Instead of trying to manifest everything I want for my life, which is also something I spend time in, I send love out to other people because I know that karma is going to come back to me anyways. So let me know how it goes. Reach out to me on Instagram at mindlovemelissa, or leave a comment right here on the show notes page at mindlove.com/x97. If you want to support Mind Love, the best way to do that is by joining Mind Love Premium at mindlove.com/premium. You get a backlog of over 50 exclusive episodes that are only available to premium listeners. There's going to be even more that will be gated behind the premium membership as well. You also get meditations and other bonuses, and early release and ad-free listening. You can also support one of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors, or you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you do, I just might read your review on the show. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.